Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning, Ida.
Good morning, all.
Good morning, all. I feel the need to start with a little bit of a caveat. I don't think I've ever done a conversation before in front of an audience of people who ask questions for a living. So I'm a little bit intimidated. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me. Barry and everybody here at Hauser and Wirth, it's a great honor for me to be able to have a conversation with you. So thank you. I am having a hard time starting because I'm looking at the work and it's incredible and the installation is so beautiful. And I have a series of questions, but I think maybe the best place to start is really to just start with sort of the parameters of the show, this particular exhibition, and then I'm sure we'll fold in some historical work as well. Can you tell me a little bit about the title and where that comes from?
Well, I'll tell you, the title is from Aristotle, Plato, okay? And we're talking about philosophers from the 300 BC. And of course, it sounds like I'm read a lot and very intelligent, but actually I saw the title first, and that sounded very interesting in terms of what it was. I was working on these pieces, not knowing where I was going, which is usual for most artists when they start out. And I came across the ethics of desire. And I really had to, at that point, find out exactly what that was and why this was so well known. Mm-hmm. And so I really could not read all of that, but I understood what it meant. And fashion for me, the idea is that one desires things, and one, at the sort of the cost of happiness, will do anything to have their desires met. And since I was working on these models, as I say, I was just working on the models because that's how I start. I really don't know where I'm going. I just start. And at that point, it was perfect. Fashion, performance, and desire. And for me, fashion and desire sort of go together. Fashion, desire, desire, fashion.
Do you pinpoint a period in your work when you really started focusing on fashion?
I think I always have.
Mm-hmm.
A number of years back, I don't remember, it was about, 2009 or perhaps earlier, I had done a series of pieces that were all sort of very cartoony line drawings, and they all had, it was called fancy shoes. And I love shoes, even though that's all I wear. I literally went crazy going into continuously scavenging magazines looking for the fancy shoes, and boy, were there a lot of fancy shoes. So they're wonderful, little cartoon figures, but wonderful fancy shoes. So in a way, I was already involved accidentally, sort of an accidental tourist in the fashion magazines.
And shoes are a perfect place to start because they resonate with me in relationship to your work because they are...
I saw the catalog.
Well, no, there
Yes.
was an exhibition of high heels at Brooklyn Museum recently, maybe some of you saw it, but one of the things that show pointed out, I think, effectively is the love-hate relationship that an object like that engenders in most of us. The sort of desire, as you said, but then also the kind of simultaneous intellectual repulsion to some degree, but at the same time, so that sort of does encapsulate what you just briefly described as the ethics of desire, the contrary impulses that they encapsulate.
It's funny because when I see these very young, and it's usually the very young women wearing the most absurd shoes, the most uncomfortable shoes, and I think to myself, that's this generation's form of the corset.
It's true. And so fashion, we're talking about fashion. We're also clearly talking about classical references to the nude. But in some sense, I think we're also a little bit talking about a directness in terms of nudity that veers towards not really the pornographic, but certainly the graphic.
But it always has, Catherine. They've always, I mean, think of David's, the David, Michelangelo David. You can't really show that, even though I'm coming to the States and you do a replica, you do anything of that David without putting a fig leaf on him, and that's pornography. Now, I know this is pornography, and the part that I love
it's explicit.
All right, it's explicit. At some point, somebody will walk in here and say pornography.
Yeah.
You know that. Charles Ray did a piece, this I just heard, I haven't seen it yet. Charles Ray is an artist, I think he's California, and he did a sculpture, and his sculptures usually, when he did one of the family, they were all without clothing. Mm-hmm. And so I think he wanted it in a very specific spot, and there's no way that they will let him do this, because the child, the little boy that he's done, is naked. Pornography. So it depends how you want to define these things, and what community you're in, mm-hmm. and what state you're in, and what country you're in.
Exactly. And speaking of communities, what's also really interesting, the high heels, the idea of them being a corset or a kind of
disabling, it's called.
Disabling,
yeah.
Which is exactly where I'm going.
Yeah.
Is the other thing that's really interesting in the work is the introduction of the idea of disability. And I'm very interested in that, having just done an exhibition about an artist with a disability. And I think there's a strong connection for me between the idea of, I'm sure for most of us, the outsider. And I think there's a strong connotation with the outsider in relationship to feminism. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your decision to include prosthetics and the idea of disability in this context.
I didn't even have to think about it. It just came when we're talking about the people out there, and that includes, well, actually, the one with the one prosthetic, Pretorius was in the news all the time, so I'm afraid I used him as a model for just one leg. But it just never occurs to me that when I'm doing people with, I was having a hard time because I wanted to put in some large size women as models. Mm-hmm. And it got to the point where I had to start stopping. So I have all the drawings for this large size woman, but I never got to put her in here. So I might just have a show of all large size people.
These are large size.
Not 10 feet. This way.
I visited you in your studio while you were working on some of these, the wonderful group out front, I think, of the women kicking.
Yes.
And the work was horizontal. And you were describing how you worked with the material and the medium while it was still wet. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your process.
Yeah, well, I do drawings all the time. That's the one thing that feeds me continuously. They're just easy for me and it calms me. So it's something I just do. And at some point I was just interested, doing these fashion. I was just gathering material at that time. And for some reason, I never know why I'm doing, but I started being extremely interested in fashion, the imagery, fashion magazines. And I started literally cloning the different models and the stances and what they looked like. And it was, they were just drawings. They were all line drawings. And for me, a drawing means it's another way of making art, which means from the drawing, I have to find another way of making art from the drawings. So I started to, and by the way, they're all digitally based. And I have to tell you that I have been a dinosaur. I refused to get a computer until 2001. I did not know how to turn one on, but I was asked to do a print at Pace, and this young man said, we'll do it digitally. I didn't have a clue how this was going to work, but I said, okay. I sat next to him, and it was just amazing to me because it takes me 3 months to get a certain effect. He goes, boop, there it was. And really, it was this dinosaur sitting there and saying, oh my God, oh my God. And I walked out of there and I went straight to the Apple store and started to try and figure out what this was about and how do I get to do it. So I literally started out trying to go to the Apple workshops. And frankly, it got nothing for me. Mm-hmm. I couldn't even bring myself to buy a computer because I figured, how do I know how to turn this thing on even? It was embarrassing, but the reason I didn't want a computer is that I hated the idea of email. That frightened me to death. And like people have access to me through email, that was horrible. I didn't want that. So I ended up desperately wanting to do things on the computer. And I met someone that I knew from...
Another love-hate relationship.
Absolutely. So I finally decided that I was going to do this and find someone who could actually work with me. And I found this young woman that I knew from the past, and she had just finished doing that kind of work for an ad agency, and she was an artist. And she was out of a job. It was perfect. The timing was excellent. She came to work for me. And from that point on, I was so hooked.
So these started off as drawings that you would make, and
Yes.
then they would be enlarged digitally?
I would take those drawings, feed them into the computer, and I have a I mean, by now I have a very, very large printer. When I first started out, you know, I did start out small. I did not start this large. And it was, and this I've learned. I mean, I started out a long time ago using the computer, using Photoshop. The first thing I worked on was called photogenetics, where I made sculptures, small sculptures, one summer because I was unable to do anything else, and put them in the shopping bag. And then at some point when I started with the computers, I took the sculptures out and photographed the sculptures, and then fed the sculptures into the computer, Photoshop. Mm-hmm. And at that point, there was no stopping me. It was incredible. And so I started there, and all the photogenetics works are started at that point. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of other things I started to do with the computer. And as far as I was concerned, it was like I couldn't stop. It was like this whole new thing. Someone gave me a brand new medium at my age, not knowing how to use it, and suddenly I know how to use this. So it was not something where these kids, you know, a 4-year-old kid, you see picking up things, and they already know what to do with the computer and what to do, you know, with cell phones. And I was old. And I had all that information from before. So I was able to take all that information and then feed that into this digital age.
But then you go back to working.
Oh yes, then they become paintings. Mm-hmm. Because like with these pieces, these are all on Mylar. Mm-hmm. And I was able to then, the minute they start coming out of the printer, while they're still coming out, they're very, very wet. So at that point, I can manipulate them very easily, make them drip, make them do whatever I want, and use brush, use fingers, use toweling, and I get it's always pretty much painting as it's out there. Once at that point, I can't really hang it yet because it will drip. It will drip where I don't want it to drip. And I want it to drip in a certain way. Some of them, I'm very happy to have the drips and I leave them in. Others, I eliminate. By the time I do get them onto the wall, they're somewhat tacky. Mm-hmm. And then I use them as total paintings. Then I go into them with oil paint, and they just become paintings.
That was my next question, because in some ways I think you could also describe them in terms of drawing, but you think of them as paintings.
Well, at this point they are, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the drawings are totally different, yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about your decision to include this earlier work, video from 1978?
Yeah. We'll call it my retrospective. This was done in the...
This is not your retrospective.
Well, I'm telling you, this was 75 to 2015. Uh-huh. That's good enough. You just fill in the rest.
It's not good enough, I'm sorry.
No, it was interesting because I have so much stuff over the years that I have in boxes, and they've been sort of moving around and going from one place to another. And those boxes have been in storage, and they've just remained that way, in storage. So that every now and then I remembered that I had these shadow puppets. They were done very, very early on. The video was done in '78, but I remember the idea that I wanted to do shadow puppets. And I worked on these pieces. They're very primitive. And I did this on the tape so that it became literally, they almost look like they're animated, but they're not. It was done by holding these rods and looking at some very old puppets, shadow puppets. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much they were done. You know, they were cut out, the shadows, on a big sheet, and this goes back a very long time. And so this is pretty much what I had done at the time, and on a large screen. So I was able to manipulate them, and then did my own narrative, and videotaped it, and in '78, I actually did show them, yeah.
Where did you show them?
They were at the Whitney, the film and video, yeah.
So narrative. there seems to be always with your work an implied narrative. And I think in the work you've just described, maybe perhaps more so, but I think in this work as well, certainly the juxtapositions and the couplings that you've put together, to me, imply a sort of narrative thinking. Do you think that's accurate, or do you have something as
How could it not be?
literal as that?
No. Look, my narratives are open-ended. I start with the narratives from the books when I first came to New York in '74. The works I had done I was in California at the time, were very, very different. Actually, my very early works were large sheets, very large sheets like this.
In California?
In California, that were done on cheesecloth and gauze and Roplex. And I worked with that material for a long, long time. When I came to New York, I had some problems with it, and I just sat and did a lot of drawings, and eventually the drawings felt like I was doing books. I was doing graphic novels. Mm-hmm. And what I would do is I have stagings.
This was not a common genre at that point.
No, it wasn't. As far as I knew, it wasn't. It was just, as I said, I never know what they're for. I just keep moving with it. Somewhere in there, it informs me, oh, is that what you are, you know? So that part's fine. And as coming into New York, I didn't really know anyone. So it was very nice because...
Why did you want to come to New York?
Oh, come on. I'd gone to school at the Chicago Art Institute. I was a young mother. I was 35, and I had 4 children. So it took me a good while, worked very, very hard. Before that, I had been, I know I'm straying, but okay.
I'm curious.
Before that, my training was actually in graphic design. When I came out, we're talking about the 50s. And so I worked in an ad agency, and it was like the 50s version of Mad Men, but very, very primitive, because nobody knew. I mean, 60s was already advanced, but this was 50s. Mm-hmm. And I was the only woman in the bullpen. I was the only woman generally besides the secretaries or whoever else worked there. And it was 1 year of hate, of having to do layouts and drawings. I couldn't really do anything else. It would be commercial. They'd hand me the material, and then I have to make something out of it. And I really did hate it very much. And so at the end of the year, I lied, and I told them I was going to get married, and I was going to leave. Well, in those days, people went to go to school or anything else they did for their MRS, it was called, mm-hmm. degree, so that they all could go get married, and that was it for women. Mm-hmm. I didn't mean for men, for women. So working in the agency after that year, I told them I was going to get married because I knew that I could get a good reference.
And if one got married, it was assumed one would stop working.
Not just stop working, but the pat on the back. I got this marvelous,
congratulations.
Congratulations.
You hit the jackpot. These men were all artists, graphic artists, and I had the most astounding cards this big put into a book for me, congratulating me, telling me to actually have 500, 400 children, whatever it was. I should be fertile. The whole thing was all about marriage. The entire, their worth. You cannot imagine that people really thought that way, and I have all this marvelous graphic work. But you had lied. You weren't getting married.
No, I got a job at the New York Public Library in the art department, and I spent very many lovely years there.
Wait, now I've lost track. Exactly, sorry. New York, graphic, narrative. See, we went down the narrative path.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I have notes for myself here because usually I do that. I go off the track, and then we'll be here for 5 hours. My narratives are always like open-ended, they're just open-ended projection tests, all of them.
So the flip books, when you started doing the flip books, those had obviously a beginning, middle, and end. Those would have stories.
Yes. You just walked into it in the middle. Mm-hmm. And I think the nice part was, it didn't matter what I said, because people who read them or looked at them or looked at anything, they put their own narrative into it. And I never have to say what my narrative is, because it's really the viewer's narrative. And it was good. And that time I loved Beckett. And very influenced me tremendously.
And I mean, so there's an obvious link between this earlier work and the work we're seeing here today.
You have no idea.
Tell.
Well, it's all about narrative. It's all about materials, and it's all about the way I work. And the way I work is continuously, I don't know. And the part that I don't know just keeps leading me into things where I don't know where I'm going, and suddenly I know where I'm going. And that's it, it just makes itself.
So is this the first time you're showing these large digital prints like this?
Oh, yes,
So,
yes.
And when you show a new body of work like this, does it feel scary to you at all at this point?
No.
No. Okay, good. The other question I wanted to ask you is about the theatrical. I mean, in addition to narrative being a constant, the question about narrative, the ambiguity about narrative, there's also the theatrical is very much a part of the way you frame the work, and I think it continues with this installation in particular. I think the lighting is dramatic, the installation is both performative and installational. So could you tell us a little bit about your interest in that?
Well, it's saying theater, and I'm not quite sure I called every book a performance, so maybe that's where you're getting it from.
Uh-huh.
And I called it a performance, and I sort of, they were all with curtains, stage curtains, so that it did look like that. And I don't know where that came from, but at some point, these little, I made stagings. They were none of them are here, actually, from the very beginning. In the 70s, I made stagings, and they were cut out the same way, and they would be folded and placed in a row, and they were very repetitive and had text on it. And they also told a story. And I would shine the light on in such a way, direct the light in such a way, that these pieces had shadows. Every one of them had shadows behind them. And for that, I worked a very long time on these. The first few years, I had worked on those, and somewhere in there, this was mixed in with it.
So if you started this in the 1950s, when would you say?
Oh, not this stuff.
No, but I mean, starting to think about flip books and these narratives, and obviously the position that you just described of your own sort of development in your career. When would you say you became aware of the politics being part of it? Was it always part of there? Feminism and other politics as well.
How could it not be? Look, it's very problematic nowadays to say you're a feminist. That's the F word for the younger generation. And yes, I'm saying the F word. But I consider feminism, it's my political stance. This is how I see myself. It's political. And there's a second wave, and now there's a third wave, and now there's a fourth wave of feminism. I'm still from what they call, that's your mother's feminism. So I'm part of that, and I really don't care one way or the other. I just know that this is what I am, this is what I do, and I couldn't do it any other way. I mean, for God's sake, the men don't have to have all men shows based on gender. Archives or whatever else is around, I resent them terribly because they're women's archives. And I know I come out of the history of art by Jansen, where no women existed. And I'm sure it's still today, not sure, I know it still exists today. And I don't want to have to say what kind of feminist I am because I don't see it that way.
Right.
That's all.
Did you know LOZANO?
I did not, no. By the time I came, she was gone, yeah.
And I think it's a wonderful juxtaposition, your two shows.
Oh, it's incredible because we're talking about three artists out of the 70s. And three artists that, in a way, were very in the same mentality in terms of politics and talking about the world, about power, about, Golub's work was, hello, somebody turned that off immediately.
So tell us a little bit about the chairs.
Oh, the chairs, yeah. every time I'd finish a show, and this has been over many years, and I go into sort of postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And every artist has that, you can't help it. I would seek out every piece of furniture or go into any store, and I have a little place upstate that I used to buy secondhand furniture, and I just go in and pick up furniture. And then I would paint furniture all the time. I don't mean paint them, I mean draw on the furniture.
Oh.
So this was like a piece of cake. I didn't have to go to any secondhand stores or sort of go through my own junk. Yeah.
But the imagery is sort of...
Oh, the imagery is all, I have lots and lots of what I call ephemera because I draw so much. Mm-hmm. And the imagery comes from, I have binders and binders of ephemera. And all I do is, that's my source, is that I just go through my binders and I find what I want to use.
And do you draw on, did you do the painting directly onto the chairs?
Yeah.
And do you see them as individual sculptures, or do you prefer to see them as groups, or?
Let me tell you something. It doesn't matter what I see them as.
It matters a little.
Not really. I mean, I made the chairs. I consider them art, but if anyone chooses to have them and use them in different ways around the dining room table and they all sit on it, it's fine with me too, even though it says here do not sit on them.
I guess I'm a curator, so it matters to me.
Oh, that's right, that's true. That's true, sorry. I didn't recognize that for a moment.
Well, because, as you know, as a curator, the most interesting conversations with artists are about how they conceptualize things, how they want to see things, how things exist in the future. Of course, that's no guarantee that will happen. But it is a conversation like this is an opportunity for me to think about things like that. Because if one was going to install those chairs in an institution or in a home, there's a very different kind of context, obviously. So I'm curious about how you would ideally like to see them. Is the installation here, you know?
There were 3 different installations of these chairs. At one point, they were going to be in the middle there. Mm-hmm. Another point, they were going to be here. Mm-hmm. And then they ended up there. So I don't envision anything. It's just what works. And anyone that has a chair, whatever works for them. I mean, I have no control over this. What are you talking about?
So the great piece in the front, the sort of roquettes.
Yeah, the marching boots, yes.
Which is extraordinary and again touches on so many different sort of points of reference. The roquettes, for instance, that sort of can kicking, the shoes, the boots, the kind of S&M-y kind of quality.
You left out military.
That was my neck, I was getting there. And then that sort of high-stepping military kind of aspect. Which comes first?
None of the above.
None of the above.
None of the above. Look, when I do these things, it's hard to ask someone who really does not understand what they're doing at that point. It's so much in me in terms of what I've always done. I've always done work about power and empowerment, and it's how governments have a power over people, doctors over patients, parents over children, obviously men over women. And I think that's pretty much followed me, whatever it is I've done. It has to do with power. That does too.
What?
And that does too.
And that does too. And all of these do. And the relationship to gender and the relationship to that power is displayed in any number of ways. And are the pieces, as they're installed, are they all individual pieces that you've installed as groups, or are they diptychs, triptychs, multiple part pieces, or individual?
Oh my God, you are a curator.
I am. I'm not going to apologize for it either. With every installation that I have, no matter what I've done, no matter what I think I'm going to do, by the time I get to this space really tells me what to do with it. Sorry. Absolutely. So, but they're individual pieces or they're groups?
They're individual pieces.
Okay. And the lighting?
Oh, the lighting, it's what you do when you have something hanging and you don't know how it works best, and you keep trying out the lighting. Mm-hmm. And there are wonderful people who work the lights, and we got to this.
It's a lovely, lovely installation.
And I supply chairs for everybody too, to sit.
I noticed but they're different chairs. There's chairs that you're
Yes.
allowed to sit in and chairs you're not allowed to
The chairs
sit
there
in.
are branded.
They're branded.
X. That's the only branding I permitted in this fashion set.
So where there's an X, you can sit.
My little joke. Permit me to have my little jokes.
So you mentioned that you think next perhaps you'll be working on or you are working perhaps on a group of pieces relating to large women. Is that correct?
Possibly. I don't know.
But those are what didn't make it into this show.
Well, there's a lot. If I'm bored at this point, then it was interesting. I'm just going to go back to this. The men and the women, I started out with the women first, because of course you talk about fashion and you think of the fashion models, and that's pretty much what I found. And then I started going into working some of the men models. And I thought, the women are so interesting. The men will be so boring. Mm-hmm. And the minute I took them all out of their clothes, the men were more interesting, the women were very boring.
Why?
I haven't figured that one out yet, seriously.
Uh-huh.
Perhaps I've never really seen men in that number.
It's certainly not as common.
No. But for me, it was startling because I loved working on the men. They were just more interesting. The women, I had to really put them into modeling mode.
Where did you source the images?
Oh, every place.
Everywhere.
Every place. Every fashion magazine was a source, yeah.
So you're always collecting source images of figures, and that's part of your archive.
Pretty much.
It must be a great archive.
Files and files and files.
So next steps. That's where I was going with the question about, I know you said you don't know in terms of maybe where your work is exactly going, but can you give us any hints?
I don't know, because at this point, I still have a lot of work in the studio that I have to finish based on that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I'd rather say I don't know right now. Mm-hmm. I do know, but I'm not going to start explaining because then I'll be tied to it, so no.
Are you working on any other media, like the film or video or anything like that?
No, I'm not.
Has the computer enticed you in that direction at all?
No. Sorry, Catherine.
That's just good to know. Good to know. I guess I wonder if we have any questions from the audience, from all these people who ask questions for a living.
How does it fit in fashion when there's continuity, and does the fashion come from the body or a specific garment, or hair, or clothes? Like, what's your kind of definition of fashion?
Well, for the most part, what you do is, for me, is that if I have all those images of different styles, hairstyles, and images of different kinds of shoes, and the men really are the most boringly dressed, then I have to put in whatever I think would be more interesting. And I had to be very careful of the shoes that I put on them, because I did not want the shoes to be so distracting. As in this catalog that Catherine has put out, the museum, they're glorious. And the minute I start doing glorious shoes, people are just going to react to the thing. And that's not what this is about. It was not a shoe show.
So the figures you're finding sources for are clothed, and then you make them? Okay.
That's correct,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Other questions? Yes.
Is the headless male figure in the Shadow Puppets Alberto? Is it the title No Use Alberto?
No, the very early books, there are none here, regrettably, but I should put some out. They're the very early black books and other books, and they were 6 by 6 inches. And the first set of books were headless, meaning that it can be either gender. And that's all it was.
But the figure who wears a suit in the Shadow Puppet, and then
That's, the headless one is always, could be man, could be woman. Since I was doing them, it was a woman.
Thank you. Other questions? thoughts? Come on, you're all journalists, right? Come on.
You're talking about empowerment of women, large size, wide size women. Do you ever meet them? This will be a real empowerment to create their
mean young women or fashion models?
just women.
I meet women all the time. I'm very involved with women.
I mean, to actually grow them.
Do you ever
Oh,
see
you mean as a
people?
model?
Yeah.
Model. No, I did that in art school. I never did it again.
So the paper and the graphics are always what attract you, rather than an individual person.
Yeah.
So, what is the variety of shoes we have here? I like the one with, particularly the one with the man with the big boots. They're, it's in the back around
in
the
the
corner
back,
there.
yes.
Yeah. So you said that you're careful about the shoes not overwhelming the figure. Is
That's
that
correct, yes. They have to fit the figure, actually.
So you pair them up.
Or sometimes I just invent a shoe, which is easy nowadays. Just put on a huge soles or huge heels, and the rest of it's very simple.
Right.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Well, this was very easy. Thank you all.